Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here. Get ready for Gnosis. Well, in my continuing series on energies, the last one to cover here, and I don't know if there's any more of them, we have the Eurotypical four, which are Orgone, Chi, Prana, and the Vril Energy. This is an interesting and a very typical of what goes on in alternative science and with the common mythology that people just love to believe in fantasies. And they're willing to die for it and support it and everything else. Just amazes me. But it's not really surprising considering all of the world's societies are built on comic book beliefs, on holy books that were written thousands of years ago. Holy books? Yeah, because there's a lot of holes in them. Holes in thought, holes in everything, holes in what they're saying. Not in the physical sense, but in the metaphysical sense of understanding, yeah, it ain't complete. And of course, none of these people could even read and write. People like Muhammad was a illiterate farmer who talked to somebody in a cave. Jesus didn't sit around writing stuff, the mythical Jesus. Didn't write anything down. People wrote stuff down literally hundreds of years later, as what happened with Islam and everything else, not to mention the conglomeration of the, quote, Old Testament, which comes from every possible ancient source there could be, and had pretty much a class of people that sat around just writing stuff, as the old Jewish priesthood was able to do, collecting data and so forth. And of course, all the documents that go back to Buddhism and everything else. When Buddha wasn't writing stuff down, other people wrote this through the years. And of course, we're now talking about thousands of years. Things like, I believe the Bible has been changed at least 185 times. So there's no finite document. The other thing is that these documents went from more primitive languages. They were picked up and translated by the Greeks. The Greek then was translated into the Latin. So that's a lot of translations. So what does all that mean? Of course, it changes. And words are very, very interesting when you try and translate them from one language to another. Anyone who's had some experience with that, and of course, my organization translated all the major grimoires that were available, mostly in French, because they have the best ways to translate from, into English. We're the first to do that, the first to have a Radionics store, the first. I've written over 35 books, 5 courses, and of course are the authority in this area in general. So if you ever tried to do that, you understand how words, particularly non-English words, and English speakers are kind of spoiled because of the fact that you have a word. Right now, it's considered that there's 500,000 to 1 million English words that are being added to daily, because English is a very changeable language fitting with what's happening at the time, which is very good. The closest language to English, I think a lot of people will be surprised, is Chinese. Chinese has a symbol that means a specific thing, as in English we have a word. Now, all other language, particularly the Yoda languages of Europe, where everybody says everything backwards. The store, I will go. So they say everything backwards is another thing. So if you think you can communicate with people of a different language that are thinking backwards, well, this is one of the problems why so many things are misunderstood and things don't progress. Secondly, all of these languages, French, Italian, whatever it may be, German, they have about 3,000 words compared to 1 million. What would you like to have? $3,000 bucks? Well, $1 million bucks. You can buy a little bit with 3,000, but you can buy an awful lot with 1 million. So, and that goes the same thing with language. You can say an awful lot with 1 million words, which should be fairly succinct, and you can hardly say anything with 3,000. So this is the problem we run into. Backwards thinking, the limitations of languages, which is horrific. So everyone needs to understand that of how we look at and interpret things. But I got off on a bit of a tangent there. Let's get down to this Vril Energy. Now, Vril is, and it's picked up by the people who push this for some of the biggest bogus idiots of the world. So, this was a novel written by, what's that? Edward Bulwer Lytton. Now, that was not his real name. We all know that isn't his real name. That was like most authors do, and most people in general tend to use other names for a whole bunch of reasons. But that was not his real name. But this was a novel, and what was it? Was it published? 1871. Basically published anonymously. It came out that the actual author of this was quite a bizarre, uncredible person called, what was his name here? Samuel Butler, who was a novelist, etc. And of course, the book came out in English, and Samuel Butler was a Brit. And once this was known, because the book was very popular initially, but once it was known and tracked to this uncredible individual with a sketchy background, the book sales went down 90%. So it is, whatever it went down dramatically. How can we believe anything on Sewerpedia when we get into specifics? But this was a very popular book because of its comic book nature. And you got to remember, in 1871, there wasn't much out there so that when people got certain products which were limited, the printing of books, the distributing it around, people grabbed onto these things. There wasn't a lot of science fiction literature then. There were a few writers here and there. So if something catches on, this is what you read. There isn't much else out there to read. So it did catch on, and bogus people like Madame Blavatsky, whose real name is Hahn. She's a German. She married some Russian who she refused to consummate the marriage with. A really strange, weird, and so typically German person. No sexuality, smoked all the time, was filthy. So the whole idea is Blavatsky, who went and spent a lot of time in India, but had no information on yoga. So her whole little contrived books that really fit into the Germanic mind and labeled races of superior, inferior, and just basically took a lot of information from other sources and made things up. Another one is Rudolf Steiner, who had some interesting information, but was another confused, kind of strange German person. So we get a lot of contrived nonsense that, of course, come from that reality and have polluted mankind since. But let's get back to, he talked about this superior subterranean race of people who use this kind of mythical energy. We can really equate this to Star Wars and the Force. And the point is that probably in 1,000 years from now, Star Wars may turn into a religion. Who knows? Certainly it's endearing to the point, but it is a mythical story. There's nothing that relates to anything of this society. Basically, Star Wars was nothing more than a serial. The old serials that were produced in the 40s that these people loved, basically it was just copying. Matter of fact, Star Wars was supposed to be a Flash Gordon movie, but he couldn't get the rights to it. So he turned it into his own little space opera. So, and you can give it various degrees of importance or not, depending on you. I mean, I think it's good entertainment. I think it has some interesting philosophy in it. And of course, these are just, everything there is made up. There's no Luke Skywalker. There is no Yoda and such. So these are just stories. It's fiction. Now, whether that means something or not, but there certainly in no way did Samuel, what is his name again? Butler have any contact with or in any way stated that he went into the underground, talked to people, which has been a myth, particularly since this book came up. There's supposed to be underground civilizations all over the world, under Mount Shasta and so forth. The earth may be hollow. Who knows? I hate to make any statements one way or another because I find that both sides are liars. But there certainly seems to be a lot of people reporting that the part of the earth may be hollow in some areas. Very strange. And of course, subterranean peoples have been talked about. We have tunnels going inside the earth that have never been explored because it's so difficult. And certain beings and different types of people have been seen supposedly coming out of these tunnels, and nobody goes down in there. It's very expensive. It's very dangerous. For what particular point? The hollow earth has never been explored, and we have to wonder why. So supposedly some credible people flew planes in there, looked around, and had contact. Pretty shocking by someone who we gave great credit to as a military officer. I'm trying to remember his name right now, but whatever. He also explored the South Pole, Antarctica, and so forth to figure out what was going on there, and found some interesting things and reported back of the possibilities or the probability of some sort of Earth beings or extraterrestrials that were living inside the Earth. So, I mean, this is quite fascinating, and we can go around and around with that, but we have no data. But we do know that this person, Butler, had no contact, never claimed he did, which would have been good for his selling of his book. So this was just a myth. It's a science fiction story. And as usual with so many things, just like Star Wars, they tend to take things a little bit too realistic and thinking that this is fact. And when you get some popular people at that time that believe this to be a true occult story, which doesn't make any sense at all. Where are they getting that from? Because it fits into their belief systems. And then this happens a lot because you got to remember outsiders are looking for anything possible to make their belief systems credible to the public. So the bottom line, if someone comes out and wrote a book and it says, yeah, I've been telling you about these beings, these entities that are around, and someone writes a book like this, you grab onto it and say, look, let's see, he knows too. You've got to understand the process here. And certainly Blavatsky's books are arduous to read and pretty much a compilation of garbage coming from a very uncredible source. So, and also this Butler guy turned out to be a fairly strange person. He never wrote any other books like this. He never wrote any more metaphysical type based books. So this was just a science fiction novel and was grabbed upon by a group of people who were looking for the usual fantasy reactions or solutions to everything that are based on what they think is real. Now, there's some talk that there may be a Vril society, people that go into that and they have these energies. There is none. The book doesn't give any ways of making or producing Vril that isn't any kind of valuable resources. This energy, which people can extrapolate to mean so many other things out there, again, is illusionary and has really never went anywhere. The people that picked this up were the fantasy people looking for something that they could use against others. This book became very popular with the Germans and the Germans around there. And so typically German is the fact that here's a fake idea, not by any German. Butler was a Brit, published in English, published by the Brits, and they stole it and made it their own, claiming they know everything and they figured out Vir, etc. This is the classic German way of doing everything, which people seems to elude them. But the bottom line is the same old nonsense. Didn't start there, wasn't their idea. They stole it and then did whatever they wanted to do with that. So, and then, of course, people have extrapolated on this, saying that every type of energy that came out there that was different, and there doesn't really seem to be any of these, anyway, was this offshoot of this. And there was contact with this. They figured out how to use this energy and so forth. And of course, this is all mythology. And it's all mythology that is really pretty pathetic. And it doesn't even come from, it came from us. We knew this person. This was a writer, etc. That was from our culture and something was there and we got to. No, this is all stuff that's just a comic book. But as I've mentioned, everybody believes in comic books. They pray to comic book gods. They would give their life for that. They give money to it. They support people with their comic book belief systems and their comic book stories. It's just unbelievable. So it's not, it's not that difficult to think that somebody would take this and extrapolate upon it. So there's absolutely no credibility or anything to this type of energy. There is nothing there. There's nothing. Now, supposedly some sort of crude type machines that may have been energy accumulators that may have been made by some particular groups, but there certainly is nothing there. Now, you can call it that to, if you want to make something sound or be accepted better, you want to have it something that may be in the consciousness of the people already. So you use Star Wars references, which are really part of our entire reality and will be forever from this point on. Disney has picked it up, just like Harry Potter. They have, within their amusement parks, they have sections of it that are dedicated to Star Wars, dedicated to Harry Potter. This is the new kind of mythology that will turn into something that may be much bigger with all of it. So basically, this book was written and it fit into the ideology and was very popular back in that time, but the ideology of basically Germans. Rudolf Steiner, who I'm not that big of a fan of, interesting stuff, but he was a strange dude himself and a problematic person. Let's put it that way. Certainly, Madame Blavatsky, one of the freakiest weirdos in the world, otherwise known as Han, her German name, which actually means chicken, is certainly a person of great question. Now, the fact that she gained popularity, particularly again in a time where people believed in a bunch of mysticism. They had nothing else. They didn't have any outlets in terms of science fiction. There's no TV. There's no, so people got into little groups like this and took certain texts to really make something that wasn't there. And of course, this still goes on today to a certain degree. But there's absolutely nothing to it whatsoever. This is a total, complete fantasy picked up and contrived into other fantasy levels by a British person who wrote, who was published in Britain first, then translated as it usually goes, and then claimed as something that came from an alien culture, not from the person who wrote it. Actually, Vril, V-R-I-L, comes from the real term, which again is very interesting, and maybe where we get that term come from viral, or virile, I should say. Comes from virile, like you're virile, that person is very virile, strong, empowered. I'm assuming that's where that word come from. It was shortened down by the use of it to vir. So it's very interesting as well to understand that. So this is a kind of an energy. I'm not sure how we can equate this to be. It may be something that is related more towards what we consider earth-based energy fields, often thought about as what would be considered traditional orgone. So basically, this whole concept comes from the fact of this author going down in these tunnels with a friend who is killed, and then he meets the Vira, or Ya, people, that's what they call themselves, who basically take him to big cities that are remnants of Egypt, of course, same old cliche. And he's able to teach them English and other things. They're very telepathic, very psychic, and have all these abilities. I said, very comic book, very classic, just like a lot of the nonsense written about Romania now, that they go down in tunnels. And of course, what do they go to? They go to Tibet and they go to Egypt. Okay, who basically both cultures have done absolutely nothing in thousands of years. Got to remember, this is written at a time where science was just burgeoning, and these kind of thoughts of what energies are and everything else. And this was a time when animal magnetism was big. So the kind of things he's talking about and their abilities, these extreme abilities of psychic power and everything else, are nothing new and kind of cliche-ish. But the bottom line is that because of the time this came out and the lack of other literature and the interest and thinking, this was a great time of metaphysical thinking. There wasn't much else. There wasn't much science. You really couldn't go read scientific books back in 1871. So, excuse me, you have to read everything out there. So there really wasn't all that much out there. It was drab and boring, and there were scientific people. You got to remember that the kind of burgeoning of information we have now is pretty rare and very much suited to the last 10 years, where we can find information on everything if you spend a lot of time, work, and energy to do that and want to read these dry texts. So always fun to watch something science fiction or read a science fiction book that has a story with it about amazing people and romance and everything else. So apparently there was, which you don't hear anything about, a sequel to this, which was a love story novel. I don't know what that's about. I've never heard of any reference to it except recently. But this was a time where people don't understand that. This is one of the confusions that they say in the early 1920s, before into the 30s, that particularly everybody, or particularly the, quote, Nazis, were so metaphysically occult based. Well, not really. That was the thinking back then. There was nothing else. People went into mysticism. There wasn't very much science, and I'm not sure how that would have interested anybody anyway. So people tended to get together in clubs, and what are they going to talk about? So the whole idea is people ventured into these unknown energies, and one of those people that spurred on most people, apparently, this book had a great influence on a huge group of the metaphysical people at that time, including H.G. Wells, apparently. So the way he wrote this made it sound very real and captured the attention of the entire world to a degree. So this became a basically something that was a nonfiction novel in the minds of many people, that what was put in here really was written as a novel, but was this person's actual experience. But the author himself said that's not true, and that he was really looking at Vril to be not magnetism, but actually modern electricity. And you got to remember, this is 1871, so there wasn't really modern electricity yet. So what he's basically describing is what he was thinking, that these people had electricity. They tried to connect the author to many groups and organizations. Some people gave him honorary. Because again, when you're a, quote, occultist, and you're trying to find answers to things, and somebody writes a well-written book like this that seems to make sense and fits your understanding of life, well, you grab onto it and say, this is fact. Now, the author never said that, never had any connections to groups that embraced him, including the Masons and the Rosicrucians. All these people wanted to take this book as fact because they want to see it as that mysterious document written by this guy who, wink, 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 oh yeah, it's a novel, wink, wink, wink. So the author himself never came out and jumped on this, which I think would have been good for him. The other thing is once it was discovered who this was, is that the book itself started to plummet in sales because it was considered very uncredible. But still, the document was there, and everybody grabbed it because there was nothing else to grab. And we've got to understand that now, in modern times, there's so much information out there to be grabbed that it's impossible to read it, to go through it, and research it. We're in absolutely the reverse. Back in those days, and even going back 20, 30 years, the gathering of information was very difficult. So this is what happened. So, and then you get a few popular people, and this continued in actual other books. In the coming years, there'd be other kind of semi-science fiction books, and they would use his term of energy as Vril. Isn't that interesting, how one thing spurs the rest of it? So one fictitious understanding of something brings in a whole bunch of people that want to glom onto that concept and use it in their own reality. George Bernard Shaw believed in Vril and commented about, I don't know if he added in his book, there's French writers of that time who used that term as well. So this became it, just as if I'm sure that the writers today who use the term force to understand that. I think force is a great term. I like to use it, but not in the Star Wars capacity, but something that's active, that's there. So this was the big term to use for unknown or futuristic energies that were coming, that a lot of writers were talking about in their futuristic books. The little science fiction that was available out there, people having these futuristic concepts. What are you going to call it? Monkey juice? So the point is there was a very popular novel that gave you that. Just like you could say the very popular movie gave us the concept of the force, this energy, this spirit, this God form. Apparently, as there is even today, there was a stage version of this created. Somebody wrote a play on this, which I'd love to see, which bombed, but who knows? Maybe that could be a play that could be reconstructed today, and there'd be great interest in it. I think it would be fascinating. Again, we have to understand it's not that this is real. It's just that the concept of these always looked at superior societies that have existed inner Earth, outer Earth, in a spaceship, in a boat under the sea, in a bubble on the world. So the whole idea is that these are the type of things. So very interesting that this would be so far-reaching. But again, there wasn't all this much out there. So if you find a popular book, and this book is embraced by the public so much, and everybody kind of likes it, well, you're going to get all these offshoots, as we have right now. I think there are stage plays. Stage plays are big now. I think there's a Harry Potter one, Spider-Man. I'm not sure if there's Star Wars, but I think there is a Star Wars play under production. And we have to understand that the people that grabbed this and popularized this are the typical fantasist, non-creative people that are out there that have achieved nothing, the Germans. So they're very typical that this would be something perpetrated because they had nothing else. This is a society that's created nothing. This was further documented by Willy Ley, who's actually a German scientist who immigrated to the United States and wrote a big article of the pseudoscience of Nazism, and how this was something that was grabbed upon, which is very typical of what the German people, scientists, etc. would do, to grab upon these fantasy realities and try and make them into something real. So, I mean, this has been documented, and it doesn't, of course, come from me. This is nothing new with the famous occult book, the Necronomicon. The Necronomicon, which was written by a author, H.P. Lovecraft, wrote about this book, which was complete and totally fictitious. There is no Necronomicon book per se. So the whole idea is that people grab upon that, and Lovecraft, who was very anti-occult, he actually wrote a book attacking all occultism, which he had published, which Houdini was going to publish, and was completely done and written, but Houdini died and the book never made it into publication. So those people who think that H.P. Lovecraft was some sort of great occultist is just complete fantasy. We know the facts. We even have copies of this book that was written against occult belief. H.P. Lovecraft was a horror writer. Horror and occultism are different, even though people tend to mix them. You mix them together, but they're not. They're completely different. Occult mysticism is not horror. It's not Freddy Krueger. It's not Friday the 13th. It's not Frankenstein. It is a completely different genre of magic and other things, not monsters. So it's important to understand that. It is important again to understand where this has been kept alive, dramatized, made to appear real. Has come from the fantasist people called the Germans, who live in every possible fantasy they can, telling you how everything is secret, how they discovered everything when they can't even build cars to pass the pollution standards in the United States, and commit criminal acts to do that. But they have all the secrets of Vril. Of course, all that, is nonsense. And many different comical societies and publications were written claiming they have all this. And what you have to understand is this is all part of the German reality of things, making up stories and lies that never come into fruition, that are based in nothing but fantasy. This is how it all works, and people are under the illusion, because part of this fantasy is how competent, well done, and how they've invented everything and know everything. They have the best of this. They build the best cars, for hundreds of thousands of dollars, that are noisy, that it's like sitting on a park bench like a Porsche. All of these things are fantasies that they brainwashed you with by filtering around the world their culture and societies. Unlike the Americans that go over, can I blend in and speak your language? I'm an American. Let me grab my ankles and you greet me like you should. Well, when the Germans travel around the world, they build cities that look like Germany. They put up signs of German names. They have towns that only speak German. So that's what they do, and they've done this on every square inch of this planet. Part of the illusion is how great they are and what they can do, and they've never actually proved that. There's virtually no technology that can be directly and completely and only traced back to the Germans, nor does anything they particularly make have any kind of quality to it. From beer to food to cars, they're like everything else in German society. They're mediocre. So the bottom line is that when you trace it, and here's a book that they want to say how much they know about Vril Energy, written by a fantasist Brit, and then claim it for their own. And then everybody wants to use that term because it's a way of explaining things. Just like if you want to explain energies to people of today, you'd say, well, it's kind of like the Force in Star Wars, because we know you know nothing, you didn't read nothing, but we know you watch the little screen with pictures on it, yeah? Remember that guy in the black helmet? Oh, yeah. So this is what everybody does. So we need to understand that in the bigger picture. We need to understand where all this comes from. You need to know that this is not a real energy. There's nothing to it. Now, if you want to make a machine and then generate some sort of energy coming from it, and then name it the Force or Vril, well, that doesn't mean that's what it was talked about in comic books and fiction books. It means that there's some sort of energy there. And it's really best not to use older names like that. But again, we get all these kind of energies from the same thought pool, the corrupt Middle Eastern thought pool, which is your Middle European people, from Wilhelm Reich. We have other Odinic energies. These are all the things that people have named. We can go on. Vril is part of this stuff. And these are basically all fantasy energies. Of course, with orgone, we have, which is named after orgasms. At least we have something there that apparently works. We don't know what it does, what it is, and how toxic and how useful it is. But apparently, this kind of energy that it was learned to be accumulated by Wilhelm Reich is something there. There certainly is no other machinery out there. Nobody built Vril machines to do anything or anything else. Oh, of course they did. It's all secret. It's all kept in a Biercellar on the Munich Stabling. So this is all the kind of stuff that we have out there. And it's the same kind of fantasy you get, particularly from this area of the world that wants to claim anything when they haven't done anything. All information comes from Egypt, Greeks, and Italy, which had the scribes, the writers, and everything else. So if you want to find beer recipes and sausage recipes, well, they all came from there. There's not a single invention that has ever came from the Germans whatsoever. But they keep pushing their lies and deceits down your throat, and you have now bought it. The bottom line is this is a novel. It's a fantasy. Vril has absolutely nothing to do with it, and it's ironic, or not ironic. It's so typical that this would be something that veered its ugly head and kept spewing its puking pea soup reality like a bad exorcism onto the public society, as usual happens from the disinformation agents who will tell you how great they are when they can't even build a car to meet the smog regulations. How sweet. Until next time.